Monsieur Trichet, is it time, given what you've seen with the euro, is it time for us to roll out the Trichet Handbook and talk about brutal moves?
Well, first of all, let me say that we have both a euro which is quite strong, and that comes out of the real economy in Europe, which is really now very roaring, I have to say, and that is good, obviously. We have an economic confidence which is very, very high, the highest in 10 years, and a lot of positives in this respect. On the other hand, you have a weak dollar, and that's part of the issue, because clearly the dollar is weak against all currencies, not only against the euro, but when I look at the relationship between the dollar and the other currencies, I see the same phenomenon, which is also a very complex phenomenon with a multiple dimension, of course, including political one.
I mean, the story that you tell is reaffirmed in the data, isn't it, Jean-Claude? It is strong data, things are recovering. So my question to you then would be, should we expect a more aggressive policy manoeuvre from the European Central Bank? We saw the governor lift the lid on that in Sintra just a couple of months ago. Therefore, given what you've just said, perhaps we should expect a more aggressive form from the ECB. Is that a fair take?
As you know, the paradox is that we have a very good real economy now, and I hope, and there is no time for complacency, of course, but I hope that it will go on. At the same time, we have inflation which remains abnormally low. The headline inflation has been 1.5 in the last reading, but the core inflation is 1.2. So we still have a phenomenon which would call the central bank to be cautious in its own policy. That being said, everybody knows that the very accommodating policy cannot last forever, neither in Europe or in the rest of the world. And so the governments, the social partners, the private sector has to cope with that and know that at a time the policy will be less accommodative. And that, of course, calls for the structural reforms that are overdue in many, many countries, and certainly, particularly in Europe. And I hope very much that this window of opportunity that the Europeans have now will turn out to be utilized for structural reforms, again, which are overdue in my country and all over Europe.
Indeed, and we'll talk about in your country in just a moment. One final insight which I'd like to glean from you. We in the media will spend the next 5 days ruminating about whether Mario Draghi should intervene verbally in the value of the euro. You did. What did you learn, and what would you advise anybody running a central bank in terms of that? Do you regret having gone for that big verbal intervention? Is there a warning that you would pass along in terms of wisdom to this ECB governor?
No, I certainly not regret to have embarked on verbal intervention. I remember very much that the comments were more of a linguistic nature. The brutal I utilized were surprising in the ears of the English-speaking friends. They told me that it was very, very, very strong. For me, it was not that strong. Anyway, what is important is to be sure that you are capturing something which is not only your own position, but the position understood by the international community. And as I already said, the problem is that the dollar is weak. And that's, in my opinion, one of the main problems we have. The dollar is weak, and it is not only for reasons that are of an economic or financial or monetary nature, but reasons that are also from some kind of political nature. And I hope very much that this will be corrected progressively.
Mr. Trichet, I want to reflect on your own country and the challenges of, I suppose, reformation. Challenges, decades of economic reform and intransigence in the statist France have proved beyond the country's last 3 leaders. Those are the words of many a fine analyst. What makes us think that Macron has the wherewithal, the ability to deliver the reform, the kind of reform that you refer to that is so badly needed?
Well, first of all, one can say that he was elected on the basis of a program of reform. So there was no, I would say, trap. He was no hiding what he wanted to do. That, of course, gives him quite a lot of political capital to proceed. Second, he has a clear majority in the parliament. And third, he's convinced himself that reforms are overdue if France wants to eliminate mass unemployment that has been a disgrace for so many years. So it seems to me that he has a window of opportunity. He started, I have to say, with elaborating on this labor market reform, and we will see. But he has all cards in his hand to proceed in this direction, and I'm sure that it is not the only reform that is badly needed in my country. So again, we will see, but I think that we can give him a lot of credit for embarking very, very actively, and from the start, not waiting. Part of the problem of the predecessors was that they were waiting and waiting and waiting, and experience has demonstrated that you have to go up front in the reform.
And there's a great distance, isn't there, Monsieur Trichet, between plaudits and the rhetoric of support from people like yourself and delivery. What is the window of delivery for Macron? He's going to go head-to-head with these unions. It's not going to be a straightforward road, is it? How long does he have before you and others will say he is delivering?
Again, it's a question of, not a question of semantics, it's a question of decisions, and decisions that are put in action. So again, we, to the extent that we will have the new rules at the end of this month, of September, I expect quite rapidly that we could say, well, on this particular domain, which is so important of labor market reform, things are done. And again, of course, then it takes time to have the economic consequences. But again, as I said, there are many other areas where reform are overdue. And I would say, personally, I think that one of the most important one, after what has been decided already, will certainly be the youth unemployment, where France has a lot to do and to eliminate this disgrace of very high youth unemployment.